This is Michael Clara. Welcome to my blog, Local School Boards Can Make a Difference. This PowerPoint presentation that I'll be narrating is titled Bad Public Policy, Silencing Westside's Voice. And what I'll be doing in this segment, it's about a 10 to 15 minute long PowerPoint presentation, we'll be talking about the October 15th, 2013 school board meeting. And this is part one of that presentation that I wanted to just point out some of the issues that came up in the board meeting. Before going into that, I wanted to kind of zoom out a little bit and just talk about, take a minute or two to just mention that in the state of Utah, we have 41 local school districts, and each of those are governed by a local school board that we have authority from the state of Utah, from the legislature. And in the state of Utah, the local school board hires, as this law shows, the superintendent of the schools on the local level, and we also hire the business administrator. Their term of office is for 2 years, and they get evaluated. I suppose each district does it different. We do evaluations scheduled to do them once a year, and that's for the superintendent and the business administrator. So what the legislature intended was that you would have the community that would elect the school board. The school board, as the representatives of the community, would then hire the superintendent who runs the affairs of the district. And the superintendent would run the district based on policies set by the school board, and the school board is elected by the community, which is why we can call it public education or public schools, because the idea is that the public would elect a representative to sit on the school board and represent their interests. Unfortunately, I haven't seen that being practiced in the current culture of this school district, and this is no exception. This is yet another illustration of the erosion that's occurring of the authority of the school board. This past meeting on October 15th, this is our Vice President, Heather Bennett, passed out Board Policy B1 and B2, and this was towards the end of the meeting, and told us that we were going to, some suggestions were made to change the policy, and the ones that she mentioned, unfortunately, only serve to erode the authority of the school board even more than it is already in the way governance of the district is being practiced, at least in Salt Lake City School District. This is a video clip of what she told us in the meeting. You can see the whole meeting on the school board website.
So they're agreeing so that you can distinguish them as they're just drafts based on conversations between me and Mikkel and Christy. They haven't been vetted by the policy committee. They will be, but we wanted to make sure that you got a draft with everything that we've been thinking about the possibility of adding to this policy or changing in the policy.
So what she told us was that that what we were seeing was something that this trio here. She says that the superintendent is right here, Mikkel Withers, and her and the board president made changes to the policy for our consideration. So in 2 weeks, the school board will vote to accept these recommendations. She said that they have not gone to the policy committee yet, but that so I guess they bypassed the policy committee and made these changes in draft form and then gave them to the board. There's a subcommittee of the school board which has 3 school board members on it, and there's some other administrators on it, and they're the ones typically that'll come up with draft versions of the policy. But in this particular case, this trio decided to take upon themselves that responsibility. So one of the things that they did is, as she passed these out to us, and that's what I'll talk about in this podcast. There's one here that I'm not going to cover here, but they have changed or inflated, I guess I should say, the authority of board leadership. And board leadership is the president and the vice president. And so I'll cover that in part 3. And then in part 2, I'll cover another set of changes that she mentioned, and that's documents and information requests from board members. So what this does is just serves to water down the authority of the board and put hurdles in blocking the board members of the board's ability to receive information. So in this one, I'll cover in part 1 this particular part that this trio submitted for consideration is bring documents for discussion in a board meeting. So they're saying any member of the board may send or bring a document or article of general interest to the superintendent, who will forward it to all board members. If a board member wishes to bring a specific document or piece of information to inform an item on the board's agenda, he or she may provide the document. He or she must, and this is the policy that they're proposing, provide the document at least 48 hours in advance of the meeting so that it can be duplicated for distribution to the whole board, and so that the superintendent, the business administrator, and the board president may assess its contents prior to the meeting. So the part that I want to focus, there's 2 parts here I want to focus on. The first one I want to just discuss here is this 48-hour requirement. That on the face of it, that's just impractical, because what happens is that we don't get let me talk about it in this order, is that if we give it 48 hours before, that means that it has to be in by Sunday at 5 p.m. So does that mean that the superintendent is going to be there to assess their content, at that point? And if he deems it's not worthy to be part of the meeting, do they notify us on Sunday? I guess that's something I'd have to clarify. The other part of this that makes this impractical is that we receive our board packets on Friday. So that means that I'm at work on Friday, so I typically don't see it until Friday evening unless I have something else going on. Then I won't look at it until Saturday. And then so that gives me, essentially what they're doing is giving me about 24 hours to review everything and decide if I'm going to have any paperwork or any documentation that I'd like to submit as part of the deliberations of that meeting. So Sunday I typically don't look at school board issues, so I'm really left to Saturday, and then Monday right now I look at things, and then on Tuesday I also review things. But because of this imposition of this 48-hour rule that they want to impose on us, they're forcing me to try to make a decision and deliberate, if you will, even prematurely, because as I point out here, on Monday and Tuesday, I may be on the phone talking to community members, to somebody at a particular school or district employee, or even other agencies about a particular issue that's going to come before the board. So I believe that there was wisdom in that we get the board packet on Friday, giving us Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday to research and to make sure that we're appropriately ready to discuss the issues that are coming before the board and deliberate on those issues at the board meeting. What they want us to do is that if we have any type of documentation, they want it 48 hours early so they can assess them, which robs us in of the deliberations. The other issue I have is that on several occasions, I've taken information that I'm going to pass out, or I've even written a letter in advance stating my position on an issue, and because of the way deliberations went, I've decided not to share the information or to distribute it, because it either wasn't needed, or the discussion changed, or I found out information that day that changed my mind. I believe that it's imperative that I have the ability to hand out information at the meeting, not 48 hours before. I mean, at the meeting. And I'll explain why that's important. I write here that if this policy goes through in its current form, Westside will lose its voice on the board. And the reason is because I got on the board in January, and since I've been on the board, they have marginalized me. The superintendent has, the board president has, the vice president has. They've shown an indifference to the issues facing my community and facing the schools in my neighborhood, and they have done numerous underhanded things, I would say, that even in public, in the public meetings, to silence me or to minimize what I am saying about the issues facing our community. In March 15th, in this March 15th meeting of the school board, this is Doug Nelson, sits right here, and he was opposed to, in this meeting we discussed the fact that I had asked for a letter stating my position on an issue in a prior meeting be part of the minutes. And Doug Nelson was opposed to it and really got dramatic about that. He didn't want my information in the minutes. And so I made a blog on this, and this was recorded on video, and you can see it on my blog. It's titled "School Board Violating the Open and Public Meetings Act." And so the following day, after March 15th, when they did not allow me to put my information in the minutes, they refused to do it, and then they were going to get with their attorney. I filed a complaint with the Attorney General's office, and subsequently they conceded that they were wrong, and that they allowed that information that I had passed out at the prior meeting to be put in the minutes of the meeting. As a result of this, they had started putting this on the agendas of the meeting, stating that, and this started in April, but I believe they went back to January of this year and placed this statement on the bottom of all the agendas. And in part it says, nevertheless, out of respect to the elected office that each board member holds, and consistent with state law and board policy, the board allows its members to attach board meeting minutes to any other information that the members request. Now, it's a bit disingenuous of them that they say the board allows. If it was up to them, they wouldn't have allowed it. They were forced to do this as a result of me filing that complaint with the Attorney General's office, and they were compelled to comport themselves to state law, and they obviously weren't following it all this time, and it's just insane that these people, a number of them have served on the board for a decade and don't even understand the very basic concepts of the Open Meeting Act and have been violating them for some time. This member of the board right here is Rosemary Emery, and she, when we had that discussion about allowing items on the minutes, she was upset that because she's been serving on the board for 2 years, and they have marginalized and dismissed information that she's tried to give them, and they did not allow that to be put in the minutes. And I believe that they went back and actually put her things in there that she had requested over the past 2 years. On August 6, 2013, the reason I bring up this meeting is because it points out that in the meeting I had passed out this letter. This was our Truth in Taxation hearing that we were having, and I had voted no. As I indicate here in this letter, I am voting against the proposed tax increase. And this was an open letter that I had passed out or mailed out to many of my neighbors, explaining to them why I was voting against the tax increase. And I knew that the majority of the members of the school board were going to pass a tax increase, but I felt it was important for my neighbors to understand my opposition to it. And so I wrote this letter. I took this letter to the board meeting and passed it out initially. And a good thing I did, because I sit right here. I was sitting here in that board meeting, and here's my laptop, and on the corner over here is where I have the camera that was showing everything. I also have made this video available on my blog for this particular meeting, and it's titled Salt Lake City School Board Lies in Taxation. As I'm explaining my vote against the tax increase, one of the things that concerned me was the salary and the increase that the superintendent was getting. As I'm talking, he interrupts me and has me stop talking, and then he orders the board president to call for the question after she's already yelling for the question, and he says, "Stop all debate, stop all discussion, call for the question." So she does. She dutifully follows his orders, even though, again, the board hires a superintendent. In this case, he runs these people, everybody, probably with the exception of me and Rosemary. We recognize our proper role, that we are part of the governing body, and we don't answer to him, but he thinks we do. So in this case, he shuts down the discussion. However, I was able to, in this particular meeting, have this letter already passed out. So what my words were and what my position was is on the record, in spite of the fact that they cut me off, verbally speaking. So, and now if we fast forward to, and that's happened in other instances, but we can take this last board meeting, for example. On the meeting of October 15th, which just happened this past Tuesday, and I wrote 2 blog entries. One is titled Swelling Bureaucracy, Hiding School Spending, and Superintendent's Breach of Contract. So earlier in the day, on Tuesday, during the day, I think I had objected to this on Friday, and I guess what happened was, in this particular case, and you can read more about this under the superintendent's breach of contract, and I have a copy of this letter. I sent this letter to the board president, and I said, this letter is to inform me that I will be voting against going into closed session this afternoon for the purposes of evaluating the superintendent. Now, the reason I was opposed to this, because I just found out on Saturday, prior Saturday, 3 days before this board meeting, that we're going to have an evaluation. The contract of the superintendent says that he will give the board a 30-day notice that the evaluation is due. And so I was just opposed to that. And sure enough, as I passed out this letter and explained why I was opposed to it, they interrupted me rudely, would not let me speak, would not let me complete a sentence, and so then I'm okay with that. There's no need for me to argue or yell or raise my voice or anything of that manner, because this written letter was passed out and will be part of the record of the minutes. We did have our closed session meeting, and then later and after that we went back into open session, and one of the issues before the board was the RDA extension. This was on the October 15th meeting, this past Tuesday. 2 weeks prior to this, we had a discussion on the RDA issue, and I had asked Janet Roberts a question about the finances and pass-through funding. She said she didn't know the answer. I asked her if she could let me know the following day. She never did. So I had to send her an email, and she replied to it. And then, but I had other additional questions that you see here, and you see the date of this email is Monday, October 14th. We are now at October 19th is today. She still hasn't answered my questions about the school spending of this particular issue that I was asking about. So what I had to do is, on the 14th, when I sent this email, and this is, me already over a 2-week period trying to find out the answer to this, by the time we get to October 15th, the day of the meeting, I wrote this letter, and sent it in to the board president. And I actually emailed it to her during the day, several hours prior to the meeting, and I says, I am requesting that this item of the West Capitol Hill RDA project amendment resolution be taken off the consent agenda and moved on to the action item agenda. Now, what I didn't realize is we are actually in a study session on this day, and so there really wasn't a place for action items, and so they were going to just move it to 2 weeks away. But that would make it so that, and you'd have to understand the way RDAs work, but the dates would be off if we tried to move it for 2 weeks. So we ended up not discussing it in the board meeting, which I was okay with, because I have given this letter and it'll now become part of the record, and it'll show why I voted against the extension of the West Capitol Hill RDA. There were other questions I had about it, but the problem is that if the business administrator won't answer these questions, this question, it's hard to ask the other questions. So I voted against it. And what this is let me just tell you the significance of this is that this is an RDA redevelopment agency project that was ready to sunset, meaning it would end. And the idea is that the school district would receive additional funding from tax dollars. So what ended up happening was, and I don't have the figure in front of me, but I believe it was about $11 million, I think, or $16 million a year in addition to of new taxes that will come out of this project if we let it sunset. However, based on the information the superintendent gave us and the lack of information that I could get, I voted against it. The majority of the board voted for it, and because they voted for it, we're going to get $300,000 over the next few years out of this project, as opposed to the $11 million, I believe, if that figure's right. Just a second. I can give you the exact figure of new taxes. Now, there's some other things that it would if we're going to get it or not, but definitely I can say with some amount of certainty that, yeah, it's $16 million that belongs to the school district. The city would receive an additional $40 million, close to $40 million in new taxes out of this RDA, and it's actually urban renewal area, I believe. It's the RDA's urban renewal area. But and I would still, I still have questions on those figures, but I couldn't get answers to them, so I was left to vote against it. For the purposes of this presentation, really, I kind of went into more depth on this than I should have. But the purposes of this presentation, my point is, I had this letter that I passed out at the meeting, and had Janet Roberts answered my questions on Monday or even Tuesday, even after I wrote this letter, I wouldn't have had to give it out to anybody because I would have voted for this project. But I voted against it. I passed out the letter. We didn't even discuss this in the meeting, but my written record is there as opposed to my verbal opposition being voiced. Didn't happen in the board meeting. So going back to this trio is the one that's come up with this 48-hour, according to what Heather told us, this artificial imposition of trying to force us to make decisions 48 hours prior to the meeting. The other concern that I have that I believe is worth taking some time and mentioning here is that she's told that in this policy it says the superintendent, the business administrator, and the board president may assess its contents prior to the meeting. Assessment means that they're going to decide if the information that we sent 48 hours in advance is worthy of being part of the meeting or not. And so what they've essentially done is these three are now going to run everything for us, understanding that this business administrator, Janet Roberts, and Mikkel Withers works for the board. And where I work, my boss does not come to me and ask my permission, to distribute or to do things. He may ask my advice and stuff, but we're not having a backwards form of governance. And this is indeed, what they want to do. And let me just remind you again, this is the way the intention was, is that the public right up here who elects the school board, then the school board is the governing body of the school district. The way, and the superintendent, as you see here, reports to the school board because he gets hired by them. But in this particular case, they've done it backwards. They want the school board here on this level down here, and then they want Janet Roberts and Mikhail Withers, who get hired by the board, they want them in charge. And indeed, really, that's how this works now in practice, except that it's a bit appalling that they're willing to put this down on paper. And I actually testified several months ago to the Education Task Force up at the legislature, and I received numerous calls and emails of people saying that, thanking me for exposing, how school governance, excuse me for saying this, but for lack of a better word, has been bastardized. And what we've done, and I think this is going to be the undoing of public education if we don't change it, when you allow this bureaucracy to run the elected officials. And that's what's, I believe, causing, it's a root cause, at least in this local district, of the many, many problems that this school district has on several levels, because they have, again, bastardized the true form of government, and the checks and balances that should be there are now gone because through tradition, they've allowed the elected officials' authority to erode. And this is the source of friction for me and the superintendent and the other board members since I've been on the board. This comes, this thing that you're looking at now, document, comes from the handbook for the school board. And it said here that board members have authority only when acting as the Board of Education. In a legally constituted session with quorum present, the statement or action of an individual member or group of members, so here you have group of members of the Board of Education, does not bind the Board of Education. So this is what they are trying to change, is to allow a small group of board members, if you will, or in this particular case, they only want the president and these hired people, who is the business administrator and the superintendent, to be running everything. And again, this is the problem. And so we need to get back to this type of form of government as the legislature intended it to be. And that's why I would reject out and out this policy proposal. And the other part that concerns me is that when we look at the Open Meetings Act of the state of Utah, this is it says that state agencies and political subdivisions, which the school district is a political subdivision, exist to aid in the conduct of the people's business, must take their actions openly, and must conduct their deliberations openly. By forcing us to present things to the superintendent for his assessment 48 hours before, I believe violates this concept of the open deliberations and taking actions openly. Why are we going to announce that, why are we required then by law to announce that we're going to have an open public meeting, and then the superintendent wants to impose a policy now that tells us that we got to, secretly, and the public doesn't know what we're sending to the superintendent 48 hours before. That violates the whole concept of deliberations that are done openly if we're going to really be forced to submit paperwork and items to the superintendent prior to the meeting, 2 days before the meeting. This is the part of the Open Meetings Act where it talks about written minutes, and this is the part of the law that I invoked back in March with the Attorney General's office that forced the school district and the superintendent to allow items that I brought, or any other board member for that matter, brought to the meeting, to be submitted as part of the minutes. It says here, any other information that is a record of the proceedings of that meeting that any member request be entered into the minutes or recording. And I like this, any member. It doesn't say the board president, the vice president, or the superintendent. They don't make those decisions. It's any member can request it of that deliberative body, and it should be made part of the record if it was indeed brought there. So I believe they're just trying to circumvent the open meetings law. Going back again, just by review, that they said here, nevertheless, out of respect to the elected office that each board member holds and consistent with state law and policy, the board allows its members to attach board meeting minutes any other information that any member requests. And as you can see, that language that comes right out of the Open Meetings Act. And so we have this on all our agendas right now. It is appropriate to have it there. The conclusions are solid. These conclusions, and we voted on this in a board meeting in April. We came to this conclusion based on the law, and after that complaint I filed with the Attorney General's office, because prior to this time they were not following this law. So I believe now, this group here really is the subgroup, if you will, of the school board between the president and vice president who are elected. But I don't believe that when I was elected, my neighbors thought that the value judgments of these two were going to be imposed on me. And I believe it's highly inappropriate for me to have to submit any type of paperwork to employees of mine, like the superintendent or the business administrator, for their review. That's just ridiculous. And then the same thing holds for a fellow board member. When you go back and look at the responsibilities that they're given as board president and vice president, it doesn't speak of, when we come back over here and you take the time to read these, they conduct the meeting, communicate regularly with the superintendent and business administrator, set agendas, sign legal assurances, represent the board, in community meetings, keep the board appropriately informed. They don't even do that well. And so, and then definitely they don't know how to conduct meetings. Several times the president has had to concede that she doesn't understand Robert's rules, and then we all have to get trained on it because she doesn't understand it. So even the limited responsibilities that they have right now, they can't even handle. So it concerns me that now they want more responsibility that will actually upset the balance of power, and that'll remove the checks and balances that are intended to be there. And I believe that part of those checks and balances is that board members should be allowed to speak freely, to bring information to the board meeting and have it part of the record, even if the rest of the board doesn't agree. This is just another way, I believe, to silence the voice, my voice, which is the representative voice of the Westside, and I believe it's a way to circumvent transparency in local government. And that's why I'm maintaining that this is bad public policy to try to impose this type of policy, on the school board. And so this went longer than I wanted, but that I had planned. But I want to say too that unfortunately, in our current school board meetings, they're no more than nothing but time-consuming formalities, and the outcomes are almost never in doubt because, as I mentioned before, there's a small group that's making those decisions. So the important decisions have already always been reached, behind the scenes and before the time of the meeting. And so there's a dearth of discussion and almost never anything amounting to a lively discussion, consideration, or deliberations, unfortunately, currently happen in our board meetings. And that's because of the culture that discourages any type of open and frank discussion in the school board and anywhere else in the district for that matter. And this is just another way of maintaining that control, that they control, the conversation and the deliberations and the debate. They want it all done prior to any type of public meeting. And this is just another ridiculous way, to try to meet those ends. And quite frankly, it's just embarrassing. And I can't believe that intelligent people And maybe that's my issue, is that I think they're intelligent people would even think of proposing something as ridiculous as this. Thank you.